It started 6 months ago, but it feels like it's never ended. There are places where darkness isn't just a lack of light. It's alive, hungry. That clinic was one of those places. I didn't know it at first, but when I saw her, dancing in the dark, laughing in an empty room that shouldn't have been occupied, I realized, too late, she saw me, and when she sees you, she doesn't stop. If you're listening, remember this. Some doors should never be opened, and some things can never be unseen. Room 104 was one of them. The night had always held a peculiar silence at the psychiatric clinic. It wasn't the kind of silence that comforted. It was heavy, like the air was burdened with unspeakable secrets. I had been working there for 6 months, initially on day shifts. They were lively, filled with the usual chatter of staff and the occasional outburst from patients. But when I transitioned to night shifts, everything changed. From the very first night, the clinic felt different, darker, colder, and strangely alive. It was as if the walls themselves were breathing, watching, waiting. I brushed it off as my imagination, but by the third night, I wasn't so sure. I finally went to sleep, ever getting better. I woke, a little in the morning. At exactly 3:47 a.m., I stepped into the hallway for my routine checkup. The fluorescent lights above flickered weakly, casting long, distorted shadows on the pale walls. As I walked past the open doors of patients who preferred to keep them that way, I heard faint whispers. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. There was no response. The whispers stopped. The only sound was the faint hum of the building's outdated air conditioning. I continued walking, my flashlight guiding me through the dim hallway. When I reached room 104, I froze. Standing in the middle of the room was a woman. Her long, disheveled hair hung over her face, and her movements were unnaturally jerky as she twirled in the dark. She was laughing, softly at first, but the sound grew louder, more unhinged, echoing down the corridor. "Ma'am," I stammered, "are you okay?" She didn't respond. My heart raced as I took a cautious step closer. The room was ice cold, the kind of cold that sank into your bones and made your breath visible. Something about her didn't feel human. I turned and bolted to the nurse's station, my mind racing. I flipped through the patient list, frantically searching for room 14. My hands trembled as I scanned the names. Room 14 was empty. There wasn't supposed to be anyone there. I grabbed my flashlight and returned to the room, my pulse pounding in my ears. But when I stepped inside, it was empty. The woman was gone, and the room was colder than before. The air smelled faintly of something metallic, like rust or blood. The next morning, I mentioned the incident to Sarah, one of the senior nurses. She had been working at the clinic for over a decade and seemed unfazed by most things. "Room 104, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I replied, my voice barely steady. "There was a woman there. She was dancing." Sarah's face paled. She glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. "The room has been empty for years," she said, "but you're not the first to see something there. It's better if you don't talk about it." "Why not?" I pressed, feeling both terrified and curious. Sarah hesitated, then leaned in closer. "They say the room is cursed. Years ago, a patient, a woman, died there under unusual circumstances. Since then, strange things have been happening. Doors slamming shut, shadows moving where there shouldn't be any, laughter in the middle of the night." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What happened to her?" "No one knows for sure," Sarah whispered, "but some of the old staff said she was possessed. She used to dance and laugh in the dark, just like you described." I couldn't get Sarah's words out of my head. That night, as I started my shift, I felt a growing sense of dread. I avoided room 104, refusing to even glance at it during my rounds. But the clinic had other plans for me. Around 2:30 a.m., the lights began flickering again, more violently this time. The hum of the air conditioning grew louder, almost deafening, and then stopped altogether. The hallway plunged into complete silence. I felt a sudden drop in temperature. My breath came out in shaky white puffs. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. And then I heard it. The laughter. It was faint at first, almost like a child's giggle, but it quickly grew louder, echoing through the hallways. I clenched my flashlight tightly and turned towards the sound. The laughter was coming from room 104. My instincts screamed at me to run, to leave the building and never come back. But something else, curiosity perhaps, or sheer terror, pulled me toward the room. The door was slightly ajar, swinging gently as if pushed by an invisible hand. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice cracking. The laughter stopped. The room fell silent. But then, from the far corner, I saw her again. The woman. She was crouched low, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Slowly, she turned to face me. Her eyes were pitch black, voids that seemed to suck in the light. Her mouth stretched into a grin far too wide for her face. Stay," she whispered, her voice layered with something deep and guttural. I stumbled back, my flashlight slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The light flickered as it rolled, casting erratic shadows on the walls. And then she lunged. I woke up in the staff lounge, drenched in sweat and gasping for air. Sarah was standing over me, her face a mixture of concern and fear. "What happened?" she asked, her voice urgent. "I don't know," I stammered, clutching my head. "I went into room 104, and she was there. She spoke to me, and then what?" Sarah pressed. "She attacked me," I whispered, feeling a fresh wave of terror wash over me. "But when I woke up, I was here." Sarah exchanged a glance with another nurse. "You need to be careful," she said softly. "Once she notices you, she doesn't stop." "Notices me?" I repeated, my heart sinking. "What do you mean?" Sarah hesitated. "You've caught her attention, and now she might follow you." The days following my encounter with the woman from room 14 were a blur of sleepless nights and constant paranoia. Every shadow seemed to move. Every whisper carried her laughter. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was always near, watching, waiting. Sarah's words haunted me. "Once she notices you, she doesn't stop." But I had no choice. I couldn't quit the job. I needed the money. Besides, who would believe me if I said I was being haunted by a spirit from an empty room? So I returned to work. It started subtly. Lights would flicker whenever I passed room 104. My keys would disappear, only to reappear in odd places. The smell of rust and decay followed me like a shadow. One night, as I prepared for my shift, I found a note taped to my locker. The handwriting was jagged, almost carved into the paper. It read, "School," then had 5 combination letters written round the base of the bar. "She's coming." My hands trembled as I looked around. The break room was empty, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. I tore the note down, stuffing it into my pocket, and tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank. But deep down I knew better. That night, the clinic felt different. The usual hum of the air conditioning was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. The walls seemed closer, the corridors darker. At exactly 3 a.m., the alarms in the ward went off. Red lights flashed, and a deafening siren echoed through the halls. I sprinted to the control room, expecting to see a malfunction. But when I arrived, the monitors were static. And then, one by one, the cameras came to life. Room 104 filled the screen. The door was wide open, and the woman stood in the doorway, staring directly into the camera. Her black eyes seemed to pierce through the screen, and her grin was whiter than ever, splitting her face unnaturally. I slammed the monitor off, my heart racing, but as I turned to leave, the door to the control room slammed shut. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped so quickly that my breath fogged the air. A voice whispered behind me, low and guttural. "Why did you come back?" I spun around, but no one was there. The whisper came again, closer this time. "You should have stayed away." The door suddenly flew open, and the alarms stopped. The silence was deafening. Clutching my flashlight, I stepped into the hallway. The red emergency lights cast a hellish glow, making the shadows seem alive. As I walked, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing down the corridor. The footsteps stopped. I turned, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The hallway was empty, but when I turned back, she was there. The woman stood just feet away, her head tilted at an impossible angle. Her grin stretched wider, her eyes darker than the void itself. "Why don't you dance with me?" she hissed, her voice a chorus of whispers. My legs refused to move. She took a step closer, her movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. Her laughter filled the hallway, high-pitched and deafening. I bolted, running as fast as I could, but the hallway seemed endless, twisting and turning in ways it never had before. The walls were closing in, the floor beneath me felt like it was shifting. I finally stumbled into the staff lounge, slamming the door behind me. My chest heaved as I struggled to catch my breath. Sarah was there, her face pale. "She's after me," I gasped. "I can't do this anymore." Sarah grabbed my shoulders, her grip tight. "Listen to me. She's not just a ghost. She's something worse, something ancient. You've let her in." "What does that mean?" I cried, tears streaming down my face. "It means she's bound to you now," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "The more fear you show, the stronger she gets. You have to face her." "No," I shouted. "I can't." The lights in the lounge flickered violently. The woman's laughter echoed from the walls. "She's here," Sarah whispered. The door flew open and the woman stepped inside. She moved slowly, her limbs twisting grotesquely as she advanced. Floor turned to Betty, and then stopped cold to the ground. "You can't run," she said, her voice echoing with inhuman resonance. "You belong to me now." Sarah grabbed a rosary from her pocket and began muttering prayers under her breath. The woman shrieked, her body convulsing as she lunged at us. The lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, its weak beam barely illuminating the chaos. "She's too strong," Sarah screamed. "You have to end it." "Cow," I yelled back, tears streaming down my face. "Face your fear," she cried. "Show her you're not afraid." The woman turned to me, her face inches from mine. Her black eyes seemed to bore into my soul. "She knits with me," she whispered, her voice a mixture of seduction and menace. "No," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm not afraid of you." Her grin faltered, and she let out an ear-piercing scream. The room began to shake, the walls cracking as an unnatural wind tore through the space. When I opened my eyes, the room was silent. The woman was gone. The clinic was still, as if nothing had happened. Sarah lay unconscious on the floor, her rosary clutched tightly in her hand. I shook her awake, and she groaned, her eyes fluttering open. "She's gone," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. Sarah nodded weakly. "You did it. You faced her." I left the clinic that morning, the rising sun casting its warm light over the building. I never went back. But sometimes, in the quiet moments of the night, I hear her laughter, and I wonder if she's truly gone, or if she's still waiting for me to dance with her again.